To me, footwear, it's a sensual joy. You put a pair of shoes on, it feels good, right? That's why we have multiple pairs of shoes, because they feel different. It's like a different meal. So my feeling is, once you dial in the way your foot naturally responds to the ground, then you can add footwear as much or as little as you want, because now you know.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Tracksmith for their continued support of this podcast. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. Their new fall collection just released and is now available. It features staples ready for all of your training and racing needs. As the weather begins to change, versatile pieces are essential for handling whatever the season holds. Tracksmith's Twilight Quarter Zip and Horizon Long Sleeve are standout transitional pieces on the run. The pin dot mesh of the Twilight Quarter Zip makes for a lightweight and airy top that can be layered or worn on its own. The Horizon Long Sleeve delivers the familiar feel of cotton with the performance of a tech blend that can be put through the paces and then be worn out for coffee afterwards. By using code FTLR at checkout, you can receive free shipping and support Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for mental health. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power, the company I use to go solar on my house. Go solar this year and you'll get to take advantage of the 30%, yep, that's new, federal tax credit next year. It's time to break free from rising electricity costs. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. Going solar isn't as hard as you think it is, and Freedom Solar is a turnkey solution focused on educating the consumer and making sure they have all the information they need to make sure going solar is right for them, both financially and as a way to help the planet. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. There are plenty of other great options nationwide. I have a super important question for you. Are you giving your body the nutrients it needs to help bolster and protect your immune system? How do you know? Friends, I'm here to help you eliminate the guesswork with two products that have had a huge impact on keeping me healthy and strong during my training and races that I strongly encourage you to try. Previnex Probiotic and Previnex Immune Health Plus are powerhouse products that can help you perform at your best and keep you healthy, especially as we move into a season where bugs that can take you down are everywhere. Use code FTLR for 15% off your purchase at Previnex.com. That's Previnex.com. Welcome back. I have Christopher McDougall joining me on the podcast today. Christopher, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Oh man, I'm looking forward to this.
It's fun to connect with you because your book, as I'm sure you've never heard before, is what inspired me to start running. And here we are today, and I've just crossed 1 million downloads on this podcast all about running, what I've learned over the last 10 years. So it feels like it's come full circle here.
It has for me as well, because, we decided to do a Born to Run too for basically that reason. It just kind of dawned on us that, a bunch of years have gone by, and it's kind of good to look back to see, what actually has worked.
So what actually has worked?
That was the funny thing about it, so ever since Born to Run came out, I would get lots of requests, like tons of emails for advice, like, what should I eat? Should I be on the Tanamata diet? Should I be vegan? Should I be vegetarian? Should I go keto? What shoes should I wear? And I'm like, people, don't ask me. Like, I'm not that guy. The whole point of Born to Run was I am definitively not the person who knows. And I put myself in the hands of people who do. But then it just kind of clicked recently. I got another batch of messages from people, and it suddenly clicked like, hey, you know what? It actually has been 15 years since I started being coached by Eric Gordon. And the thing he promised me 15 years ago really worked. I said to him, dude, if I could just walk out the door and just run as far as I want, whenever I want, as fast as I want. That to me is a win. I don't care if I qualify for Boston. I don't care if I ever do a Tough Mudder. I just want to be able to go out the door and have fun. And he goes, that's an achievable goal. And it clicked like, hey, you know what? It's been 15 years and that's exactly where I'm at. And so, yeah, the whole approach of treating running as recreation to us has been a real winner.
I love that. And it sort of parallels how my experience in the sport has been. To bring you up to speed over the last 10 years, I ran my first half marathon the day after the Boston Marathon bombing. That was my first stress fracture as well, because I was basically running 7 miles a week. And then I did 13 in one go. And I got so into the sport and like so down the rabbit hole in a little bit of a different way, in that I was so obsessed with qualifying for Boston and breaking 3 and doing all these things that I felt were necessary to like be a real runner, which is so ridiculous. And then I found the approach that you're talking about, which is it's a celebration, it's fun, it's joyful. And then I broke 3, and then I, ran 45 miles, and like all of these other things happened with the caveat that they didn't happen until I found that approach. And so I'm curious how you landed on that, like from the jump, or was it truly from the jump, or was it a learned and evolving process where it truly is recreational for you?
What happened with me first was I went through your initial phase of getting hurt all the time, not enjoying it, kind of hating it, and looking around wondering, how come some people like it, but for me, it's miserable. And my entry to running was, I think most people's, you kind of finish college, you get in your mid-20s, you get in your later 20s, and the stuff you're getting away with at 19, you're suddenly not getting away with at 29. And, you go out for a night of nachos and chicken wings, and a couple of weeks later, you realize you're about 7, 8, 10 pounds heavier, and it's not going away. So my initiation to running, like most people's, was a reaction to food. Like, okay, you know what? I got to lose a few pounds, or if I want to keep drinking, I better start running. And so that was it. It was food was dictating my running. And so you go out there and you try to bash out a few miles, and you have the mindset of like, well, if I'm not uncomfortable, then I'm not doing it right. If I'm not breathing hard, if I'm not in pain, then I'm doing it wrong. The idea was that running is a punishment. Hey, I eat a lot of food. I better punish myself. I better be uncomfortable. So I was on that cycle, constantly getting injured, never enjoying it, trying to put artificial goals in front of myself. Like, hey, you know what? I better train for this race in 4 months. Otherwise, I won't run at all. And this becomes, to me, a very self-defeating hamster wheel of I'm only running as a punishment. It should feel like a punishment or I'm not doing it right. I better set a goal so that if I don't do that goal, it's a punishment. It becomes a constant punishment cycle. And then, I got injured a ton and then stopped running for years. And that's when, I got an inkling that there was this tribe, and it started the whole Copper Canyon Tarahumara adventure. And that to me was that kind of lightning bolt moment that I get down to the canyons and I'm watching people run and like, well, they're not punishing themselves. They're having a good time. They're laughing, they're talking, they're partying, yet they're running way better than I am. And I come back and I share this with Eric Orton, who I just met for the first time, coincidentally, because I was contracted to write a magazine article about him. And I said, yeah, it's weird, dude. I met this tribe and they seem like they're having fun. Like I can't make sense of it. And he could. He explained it to me. And this is the key. Here's the thing, Jonathan, is that if humans truly evolved to run, then it should be a pleasure cycle, not a punishment cycle. Because anything that's pleasurable, you're going to want to repeat that process. Your body is going to signal to you, this is a good thing. Anything that's a punishment, your body is going to pull away from. And so no matter how much you try to mentally overcome those obstacles, if you don't like it, at some point you will quit. If you do like it, you will be rewarded and want to continue it. And so that's when he opened my eyes to the fact that if you run within yourself with a sense of joy, then you will get the performance goals that you want. But it's also not a simple process. It doesn't mean just go out and jog with a smile. It means dialing in your form, your fitness, your footwear, your food, all these things dialed in so every run feels like a victory lap.
I love that. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are listening and saying, okay, that sounds good in practice. He's making it sound super easy. And it's that next step of, okay, it's not enough just to believe this to be true. You have to live it. So for you, how did you translate it from doing it because of the food, doing it because, you like beer, that kind of a thing, into, going out and running as far as you want and having it truly be joyful?
So there are a couple things that I think are crucial. And one is to address each thing individually. So, one of the difficulties we have is we got a lot going on in our lives. We have a lot in our schedules. And so we tend to isolate running as this like 45 minutes we can do in the morning before we rush out the door. What I was trying to get at was what's a way I can look at food, I can look at footwear, I can look at form, treat each one of those things as something to dial in, but constantly being contributing to this goal of not going faster, but going happier, so that every run starts to feel good. So let me give you an example. Food, for instance, it is really hard to dial in food. You can have a million different approaches to how to dial in food. Most people come from an abstinence model that, well, I better give up this or I better give up that. But they don't really know if the thing they're giving up is actually benefiting or not. And so one thing I like to do is a thing called the 2-week test, where you remove all the high glycemic foods from your diet for 14 days. And at the end of 14 days, you reintroduce a couple of foods one at a time. So let's say you get rid of all the rice, pasta, breads, pastries, all gone for 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, you have a sandwich, but on one piece of bread. Put some lunch meat on a piece of bread, fold it over, eat that sandwich. How do you feel? If you feel good, now you've locked in on a carbohydrate level that's good for you. Then eat a sandwich with 2 pieces of bread. See how you feel. If you feel sluggish, bloated, that means you're jacking your insulin too high. But the whole idea is, in your approach to food, rather than starting from this like draconian, hard, I got to do this or that approach, just go back to factory presets and start to understand how your body's actually responding to specific foods.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. If only there were a way to measure internally, which
Right? Right?
I joke because that's my day job.
Let's discuss that. I'm curious about that because with Inside Tracker, so do you find those two approaches compatible? What if you did the 2-week test? Is that also a good way of starting a tracking period?
So people often ask, should I stop taking all my supplements, or should I, eat perfectly for 2 weeks and then do a test? And our answer is always the time to modify is, with the data, versus, there is some value of a lot of the so food sensitivity testing is not very accurate and not very strong. So the model or the method that you outlined there is an excellent way to diagnose or understand specific foods that don't make you feel good. So you're absolutely on the right track from an evidence-based standpoint on that aspect of it. On the flip side, you can skip some of the trial and error aspect of what you were talking about in regards to, like, if you remove something, well, what if your body needed it? That's the part that we're sort of seeking to address, and then understanding what else do you need that you're not currently using or eating.
Yeah. So to me, that's the perfect marriage of physiology and technology. And I think
Right.
most of us tend to err on the side of technology. We want to rely on our devices for everything. And the difficulty with that is at some point it becomes inconvenient, or you don't have the device, or it's too complicated, so you stop. And if there's a way of matching what you've learned from data with what you actually feel. So here's another perfect example, like heart rate monitors. So the idea of running in heart rate zones is terrific, but the chest strap is kind of a pain in the ass. It's inconvenient, gets sweaty, gets kind of funky and smelly. The wrist monitors aren't really that accurate. So running within heart rate zones is, I believe, crucially important for getting into that sort of happiness cycle where you're actually running and you're not putting yourself into anaerobic debt and you're giving yourself recovery time. But I think relying on the device all the time is a recipe for failure.
Right.
If you can match the technology with a physiological read where you can sort of tell yourself by your breathing rate, by how your legs feel, that to me is the perfect marriage.
Yeah, and look at people who monitor sleep. There's a lot of data around people monitoring sleep who end up sleeping worse because they're scared of what the sleep metrics will show them.
Yeah, right. You become anxious about the thing that's supposed to make you relax.
Right.
So here's an example. So one thing I was going to say. So with heart rates, one thing I like a lot, Jonathan, is if something has a long pedigree, if it's got a long history of success, that to me is an indicator that we might be on to something. So with heart rates, I was looking back at what Julius Caesar did with the Roman centurions, because the Roman centurions were like the fastest foot speed army in history and probably unmatched to this day. These dudes could cover 50 miles of rough terrain in like 30 hours. They were unbelievably quick, and with their heavy gear on. And what Caesar did was he would train them by pace. And the way you train by pace was the same thing Arthur Lydiard did. It was by conversational rate. And so if you could maintain a constant talking pace, that was one gear. If it was call and response, where I say something, someone else says it back. So you talk, silence, that's another pace. Singing pace is a third pace, where you can actually run rhythmically, but you're singing in a rhythm. So he set these three paces: conversational, call and response, singing. And those essentially lock in with 3 different heart rate zones. And so you can actually sort of dial in that for yourself. Now, am I at a pace where I can talk comfortably with a friend? Am I at a pace where I can only gasp out a few words? That will tell you what heart rate zone you're in.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Again, removing the wearable piece of the equation. Some of my best runs this year have been watchless with a friend or solo when I needed to go truly easy for recovery purposes. And it's like we have so much technology that's so beneficial and so helpful, but sometimes it's so pure just to strip it all away and go for a run in the woods with nothing tracking you, and bring the joy back.
Yeah, and they don't have to be contradictory goals either. But as you pointed out with the sleep study, as long as the technology is getting you closer to the goal instead of creating its own new anxiety, then you're on the right track. Here's another whole other avenue is like footwear. So people will rage endlessly about what shoes you should wear and why. Cushion or no cushion, minimalist or no minimalist, carbon fiber plate or no carbon fiber plate. I was actually talking about that with Eric Orton today because there's a new study about what the new super shoes are doing to stride and gait and perceived effort. And I'm like, dude, that is way too in the weeds. Because every 6 months there's going to be another argument about the footwear. To me, footwear, it's a sensual joy. You put a pair of shoes on, it feels good, right? That's why we have multiple pairs of shoes, because they feel different. It's like a different meal. So my feeling is once you dial in the way your foot naturally responds to the ground, then you can add footwear as much or as little as you want, because now you know. Here's something my wife does. She'll go out for a run. She'll hold her shoes in her hands, and she'll do the first quarter mile or so absolutely barefoot. And then once her foot starts to bother her a little bit or gets a little bit rough, she puts the shoes on and then continues her run. But what she's done is she's kind of pre-gamed by acquainting her foot with the ground, acquainting her body with form, and then she puts the shoe on and she has the joy of running in a nice, comfortable shoe.
I've had coaches that have either requested pre-run or post-run to do some strides, maybe not at speed, but just in general, barefoot to, as you said, get reacquainted with proper form. And it forces you to have proper form. Otherwise, it hurts.
Right. My objection to doing the strides is that it becomes an unnatural stride. It's not exactly what you're doing when you run, because if you're doing 50-yard strides on a grass infield, you're kind of doing it. It's almost like performance. You're only doing that. You're only doing 50 yards. What I prefer is actually do your actual run. That if I'm going to go out and do 5 miles through, Dorchester, I'm going to set off right down that street in my bare feet with the idea that, hey, the second I start to see some gravel or some glass or something, then I put my shoes back on. But run the way you really run, as opposed to creating an artificial thing that you only do for a couple minutes at the end of a run.
Got it. So switching gears a little bit, over to Born to Run, the first book. I'm curious if or how you've reflected on the fact that a lot of people read that and then they were like, yeah, I'm going to get into running. I mean, that's like literally how I met running. Was somehow I got this book in my hands and I read it in the bedroom I grew up in after college. And I was like, I want to try this. This sounds awesome. And then I got connected with November Project and then the Boston Marathon, and all of this stuff led us to where we are today, which is like 11 years, almost 10 years later. I'm curious, do you hear that frequently? And how does that feel that like my life is categorically different because of something that you did 15 years ago? And I'm incredibly grateful for that. So, sort of curious, like, is that something you ever think about? Do you think about it, every so often?
I'm really curious about it because, when you and I met, it was at November Project. When I met you, you were like full on, like you were in it. And it takes a stretch of the imagination for me to picture you as not that guy. Because again, I think it was like a Wednesday morning. It was super early. It was Boston. It was freaking cold. And, we did, I think the day that I met you for 2 November Projects. There's one where we go up that hill and over the top and then down another hill. And there was like people playing tag at the top. And if they tag you, you got to
out. Yeah. Yep.
But then afterwards, everyone crowds into this like coffee shop and, having coffees and like getting warm inside. And so that's my recollection of you. I associate you with that, as a dude who's fully in the tribe, living the life. And so to think of you as not that, it's kind of unusual. Your question was, do I reflect on it? And I do. And I'm always curious about what it was. Like, do you remember what it was about the book that they made that transformation for you?
I do, I think. So first, that must have been either late, like the winter of 2014 going into 2015, because I then remember you had promised to meet us in Utah, which happened in 2015.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that's signed into my book that that you're going to meet us there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do remember what I think it was truly about the sense of adventure and the way that you explained your adventures in running long distances, in meeting people, in interacting with the world on foot. And like I said, I was a year or two out of college and sort of like, still doing the go out every weekend and get hammered thing. And it was fun, but it wasn't like fulfilling in any way to, wake up with a hangover every Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And I read this book. Somebody must have given it to me or something. But anyway, I read it and I was like, this sounds fun. This sounds like, again, this sense of adventure. And so again, fast forward 10 years and I love racing marathons because I love riding that line of like how far is too far and can you like push on the gas just far enough, but like you better damn push on the gas just far enough without going too far. So I love racing marathons and then doing long epic adventures with friends. So rim to rim to rim, like stuff like that. And the sense of adventure and the sense of curiosity came about very early on from what I can remember. And I'm sure that wasn't the only piece of it that like pushed me to think that way. But I very much remember reading this and being like, this makes so much sense. Why can't I go out and move my feet? And I was doing like a lot of CrossFit style workouts at the time. And so the idea of adding running as like functional movement into my exercise routine was just like, yeah, that makes sense.
It's funny. Back in the day, back in 2005 or 2006, when I was really starting to work on Born to Run, I was looking around online for videos or demonstrations of anybody teaching proper running form. And the only ones I could find were CrossFit. I think CrossFit has not gotten the credit it deserves. For back in the day, it was really focused on good, efficient, biomechanically sound movements. And the CrossFitters were the only one that were treating running as a physical skill. Everybody else was just like, oh, well, you run the way you run. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. I think early on in CrossFit, it was all about skill and proper movement form and patterns and whatnot. And then as it grew, the sort of guidelines became a little looser. And that had an impact on quality. I went to a number of classes at different boxes, and like there's no observation of form, at least from the 3 or 4 that I went to. Sort of n equals 1 there, but yeah, it's an interesting observation. And then I ran that first marathon in the toe shoes because that's what I learned about. And yeah, now here we are in 2022. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so here's the thing about it, and it applies to both of these things. You running a marathon in toe shoes, CrossFit straying away from its initial mission of teaching the form. The death of any skill is competition. And, it's interesting. When I wrote Natural Born Heroes, I looked a lot at parkour, and the parkour purists are adamantly against competition. They say the second you begin to compete against each other, you don't give a crap anymore about the skill. It's not about what you're doing anymore. It's only about the other guy. You're trying to beat the other guy. And I think the second they created the CrossFit Games, skill was out the door because it wasn't anymore about how cleanly and well you're executing the deadlift. It's just how many and how much. And I feel almost with every single sport, that's what happens. And to me, unfortunately, that's one of the real problems in recreational running. It is so competition based, so performance based. If you tell anybody, hey, guess what? I just started running. I guarantee someone's going to ask you, oh, have you run a marathon yet? Have you qualified for Boston? Have you done a 10K? People start talking about racing instantly. And in every other sport, you don't talk about competition early on. You talk about learning it, If you're learning how to play the violin, no one's like, hey, have you been played before an orchestra yet? Like, no, dude, I'm just learning how to move the fingers, Guitar, have you done an air battle guitar yet? No, dude, I'm just learning how to pluck. And that's the problem with running is that, and most people do this, that the reason they get into running, not only is it about food, but it's about a race. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to start running today because I want to run a 10K in 6 months. So again, unfortunately, it's putting the pressure and the anxiety, the performance level before the mastery level. And that's what happened with you. So, you get into running and it's, hey, it's about minimalism. I'm going to put these barefoot shoes on and I'm going to race. I'm like, dude, it can be one or the other. You can master minimalism or you can run a marathon, but you put the two together and that's a cast waiting to happen.
I got a stress fracture on that run.
Yeah. It was funny, Jonathan. We did an event on Governor's Island. There was a guy, John Durant, who was putting together these annual barefoot festivals. And he did one on Governor's Island. And we were filming people running in 5 fingers or barefoot. And anybody in the 5 fingers, they were still running as if they had cushioned shoes on. Like they changed their shoes, but they hadn't changed their running stride at all. Whereas the people who were full on barefoot had actually dramatically changed their stride. Huh. And I was kind of looking at this kind of cringing like, oh, people are going to pay for this.
That's funny. So a little prior to that point, you were talking about you can either master the craft or you can compete, or some version of that. It alludes a bit to a topic I talk a lot about on the podcast, which is process versus outcome. And so it's an interesting way to put it because you can either like completely master it, and to do that, you have to zoom in on the little micro carrots that help inform how to achieve something, while also completely zooming out of like any specific outcome. And it's so fascinating the way that you outlined it that way. I'm curious, like, is that part of how you think about it?
Yeah, completely. And that to me, I think was the big master reveal. So again, I came into this process really basically following the same thing I'm telling people don't do. My motivation was I've been down the Copper Canyon. I met this wacky dude named Micah True. He said there's going to be a race in a few months, a 50-mile race against the Tatomata. I was really like excited by that prospect. I just watched members of this tribe, racing through the canyons in sandals, and you see that vision. Like, I want to be that, I want to fly like they fly. And then I meet Eric and he goes, I can teach you how to do that. Like you can make that race in 9 months. You can go from 0 to 50 miles in 9 months and be in the race. So my motivation was the same thing I'm telling everyone else is a mistake. I wanted to compete in a race that was beyond my grasp in a very limited amount of time. But I had the benefit of a coach who was focused on form. And he also said, you're not going to do it in sandals. You're going to wear a pair of Nike Pegasus. You're going to wear, back then, the Pegasus was actually kind of a moderate shoe. It was moderate neutral. It had maybe an 8mm drop. It wasn't bad. He goes, you're going to wear the Pegasus. You're going to do the race. And then if you want to do minimalism, you do that after the race. And so that's what I did. I trained for the 50 milers. I ran it in running shoes. And then afterwards, I kind of went back to 0 and started working on form. And to me, that became so gratifying. To this day, I get a lot of pleasure out of focusing on running form because it's one of those things where, if you play basketball or you play a racket sport, no matter how good you get, you don't hit the ball the same way you want to every time. If you got a pretty dialed in jump shot, yeah, you'll hit 2 out of 3. That third one's going to be a clanker. But it's the pursuit of the consistency and the perfection that makes it interesting. And so when I go out to run, I'll start to run. I'll feel kind of janky. I'll warm up. I'll get my form dialed in. I'll feel great for a mile. Then the form starts to spin off. I get kind of, clunky again. But it's the goal of trying to get that flow and that really cool, relaxed, easy feeling that becomes the goal in itself. Like, I don't give a shit about racing. I don't care about speed. It's kind of like what Caballo said. Caballo used to say, first focus on easy. Because if that's all you get, that ain't so bad.
If you've been enjoying this podcast and can spare 90 seconds of your time today, can you do me a favor? Can you pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review? It helps other people find and enjoy the podcast too. Thanks so much. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast and for their continued support of not just this podcast, but for the running community in general. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and I'm excited that with all purchases made using the code FTLR, you will get free shipping, and Tracksmith will donate 5% to Bigger Than the Trail, an organization that is using trail running as a platform to advocate for and provide resources related to mental health. Thanks again to Freedom Solar for supporting this episode of the podcast, as well as our desire for a greener energy source. The buying process was fascinating and so eye-opening, most notably how simple and cost-effective it can be. I'm excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious, message me on Instagram or Twitter, and I'd be happy to help you get in contact with some great resources or even just answer some questions. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, Florida, and now North Carolina too. My parents have the same panels from a different company in Massachusetts. More than a few friends and podcast listeners have already gone solar, and they're all so excited and happy with the process with Freedom Solar so far. Previnex has amazing products that have benefited my health and the health of other runners that I know, which is why I'm so excited to introduce Previnex to you as our newest sponsor. They also have a killer everyday immune supplement called Immune Health Plus that I've been taking and will tell you about in a future episode, but I highly, highly recommend you check these out and try the products for yourself. One of the best parts is that if you don't experience benefits on any product within 30 days, they have a no questions asked 100% money back guarantee for a full refund. You have no risk and everything to gain here. Use code FTLR for 15% off your first purchase of any products at Previnex.com. That's Previnex.com. And I can't wait to hear about how these products are making a difference in creating health in your life. I love that. One of the first episodes I ever did with this podcast was with McDougall, who is a pretty accomplished marathoner and ultra runner. And in the podcast, she talked about how like one of her goals with running is to experience flow as much as possible. And it's that kind of feeling that there's no shortcut to achieve. And when you feel it, oh, you feel it. And people who have never experienced it like won't know what we're talking about. But people who have experienced it, they put in work and they've run the miles to be able to go out and run 16 miles and like have an hour of it or 2 hours of it just like fly. And that's the feeling that I'm chasing. And that's the feeling that it feels like the people who are on the right track to conventional levels of success are experiencing quite often. However they define success is up to them. But I'm talking about people who are PRing and BQing and OTQing and like winning races and stuff. Like they are most likely experiencing flow on a very regular basis, or not very regular basis, but on some sort of consistency because of consistency.
Yeah, that's the upward cycle you get. So let's say you set out for a run and your only goal for that run is I'm only going to run as long as it's comfortable. And as soon as it's uncomfortable, I'm going to stop, turn around and walk home. And all I'm going to focus on is good, quick, easy running form. And so let's say for that first day, you only run 1 mile. You got plenty left in the tank. You feel like you haven't really worked out at all. But because you got plenty left in the tank and it's such a pleasurable experience, you can't wait to go out the next day and do it again and do it again. So as long as you run within your limits and you focus on something that is immediately gratifying, and what's immediately gratifying is a really pleasurable movement. You know, when your stride is right, when it's quick and easy, it feels good. And the second you try to push beyond that and it's uncomfortable, that sets a negative cycle in place. So we do this thing, the whole secret of running form to me is about 2 things. It's about cadence and a foot strike. Like you lock those 2 things in, you're good to go. And so one way to practice it is a very kind of self-gratifying exercise. We tell people, take your shoes off, stand against the wall, and run in place to the song Rock Lobster. So Rock Lobster is a perfect 180 beats per minute. Boom, 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 boom. You meet that rhythm, you have your cadence. And if you're running barefoot in place, like you can't heel strike, you can't overstride. That's why the wall's there, because if you start to kick back and force it, you'll hit the wall. So I can share a nice little video with you of like my wife demonstrating this. But when you look at it, it looks like a Zumba class. It looks like fun and easy, but that teaches you that gratifying form. And then you take that out on the road and you're good to go.
That makes sense. Yeah, we got to see that video, especially if it's of you doing it. So in the a couple of minutes ago, I alluded to conventional success versus like how people define success. I've found this to be a fascinating topic on this podcast because I get to talk to so many people who have achieved conventional levels of success. They started a business, they won a gold medal at the Olympics, they published a book that created a movement, like things that outwardly appear as if like you've reached the top or you're well on your way to it. And then when you ask them to define success, it's often something like categorically different than that. So the next question that I'm curious about is how do you define success?
I would say you are successful if you have figured out. Let me try a metaphor first and see if it works. There's some guy who was saying that the best races are the ones where you drag your foot across the dirt and say, this is the starting line. Now, I guess that's kind of crappy. It wasn't conveying what I wanted to convey. I think the idea is, well, here, let me get it to another way. So if you watch sports movies like Rocky, Bull Durham, White Men Can't Jump, you notice in almost all those films, they don't win. They don't win the contest. They define for themselves what victory is. And it's usually the satisfaction of perfecting something for themselves, trying to get something right. And when they get it right, it doesn't matter if it's the fastest, the best, or the biggest, but they tried to perfect the skill and got as close as they possibly could. And to me, that's kind of success. When I'm setting out to write a book, I have an image in my mind of what I want it to be. And then I'm going to spend all the time I can to get as close to that vision as I can. And whether people read it or don't read it, whether they like it or don't like it, that's out of my control. But what's in my control is me matching the execution to the vision as close as I can. And that to me is success.
Why do you think so many of those stories and so many of the pro athletes are so much more fulfilled by these intangible victories versus something tangible like a medal or a time or something like that?
I think anyone who's become a professional athlete has lived with the activity for so many years that even though what we see is the Sunday afternoon on TV version, what they see is the in the gym at 7:00 when everybody else has gone home version. And when you're in the gym by yourself with that rack of balls working on corner jump shots, it's only you and your wrist and your arm. That's it. It's perfecting the movement over and over again. And I would imagine that if I'm an athlete at that level, long ago, you realize that the game day stuff is kind of out of your control. What is in your control is the perfection of the motion and the movement and the timing and the skill. And I bet you even in the moment when like a wide receiver is going up long for a catch, before they even come down with the ball, what they're remembering, what they're feeling is all that muscle memory of practicing the movement. And then they come down with the ball, everyone screams and yells and they're on TV, but that's after the fact. I bet you for them, the moment of success was when they realized, oh yeah, everything I practiced for years, it's working right now.
So it's like that execution of consistency, and it takes consistency to see excellence, but it's not excellence that is the excellence is the byproduct versus the goal.
Yeah, I always look at it as a two spirals. You can just spiral up or you can spiral down. So, we started off talking early on. Well, if I'm running to get in shape because I ate badly, and I really need to run hard in order to burn off those calories, to me, that's a downward spiral. You're chasing something that is one punishment after another punishment after another punishment. But if your only goal is, I just want to learn how to do this one movement really well. Hey, I did it. It feels good. I can't wait to do it again. Hey, I did it again. That feels great. Like I've dialed in my eating so that my diet is no longer, my fork is no longer my coach. I got my food figured out. I don't have to worry about that. All I got to think about is, let me just try to get this one motion feeling as good as possible. That to me is an upward cycle. But all I'm trying to do is this one thing. And when I do it, my body is flooded with endocannabinoids and serotonin. I'm getting an immediate chemical reward for having done this thing. And that to me is the upward spiral. But what it depends upon is removing all the outward pressures. I'm not running to punish myself for pizza. I'm not running because I got a 10K. I'm not running to impress my girlfriend. I'm only running for the sheer pleasure in that moment from the run.
It sounds good in practice, and it makes sense as to why it's allowed a lot of people to achieve what they've achieved. And it's sort of how I've evolved into my own relationship with running. For someone who's listening and they're like, okay, I love how this sounds, but I don't know what it means. How do I act on this? What would you say to them?
I would say number one, first and foremost, is find a group. Find a group. So I think that was the genius of November Project. It's the genius of Harlem Run. Up in Boston, it's the genius. So up in Boston, I went to a track workout with Pioneers and Trailblazers. Have you run with them, Jonathan?
I haven't. No.
Are you still in Boston?
I'm in Boulder, Colorado now.
Okay. All right. I'm almost thinking it's worth a flight back, but might be a little extreme. But we did a run with Pioneers and Trailblazers. It's an affinity group. It's based around people of color, but they're doing a track workout. They're doing like 440 repeats, which to me is like the definition of punishment. Like, man, No one's ever done 440 repeats and left with a smile on their face. We had so much goddamn fun. It was crazy. And I'm looking at them like, I feel like Harvard Business School should do a case study of how pioneers made a track workout fun. Like they cracked the code. But here's what they did. You show up on a big track and you're on green. So instantly, green is associated with fun. It's a big grassy infield. It feels natural, it feels fun. People get there, they're all chatting, and then it's broken into pace groups. And you're encouraged to go one pace group slower than you think. If you think you're a 7-minute miler, go with the 8 group. You think you're an 8, go with the 9s. And then each pace group has a team leader that's leading it and get everyone revved up. So suddenly you've broken up in like 7 or 8 different cheer groups. And then this is my favorite part is that the faster people, when they finish, they're doing a cheer tunnel. So if you're like, hey, I'm self-conscious because I'm an 11-minute miler, well, it doesn't matter because the 7-minute milers are treating you like you just won a gold medal for every single repeat. And at the end, they have snacks and drinks out there in the field. So in some ways, it's a very simple thing to do, like socialize, form pace groups, have snacks afterwards. But to me, if you are a new runner and you're looking to understand what brings joy to running, a group is step one. Like I said, November Project did it. Pioneers is doing it. There's a terrific group in San Diego called Santa Mujeres. That's the first thing. And then the second aspect of it is that you cannot, no one's ever finished a run with a friend and thought, well, that was a bad idea. Every run that we can do with another person, almost by default, will be a happier run than if we did it by ourselves.
Totally. I posted on Instagram yesterday, running hack, community makes you stronger, faster, happier. Because I completely agree. I was in a bit of a funk this summer, and coming out of it, one of the tactics I took was to fill every single mile with another person. So for like 2 straight weeks, every single mile was with a friend, and and I did a couple of them without a watch, and it brought the joy back, and I stopped caring about pace, and happened to get faster as that went on. And it's so true. It's like, it's such a different experience when you use that time to catch up with a friend or to, whatever. And then you blink and an hour has passed and you feel great. And the endorphins, or I call them outdorphins, are flowing. And, that's the secret.
It's a great goal too, Jonathan, is that if you can find somebody in your life that wants to run and is reluctant or having trouble, because that person is going to enforce your easy pace. If you pick somebody in your life, a spouse or partner or friends, I always wanted to run, but I'm not really in shape. If you make that person your companion, number one, it's going to force you into a much more controlled pace for yourself. It's going to be conversational, and you're going to get that sense of gratification. Like you're giving this person an unbelievable gift in their lives.
Yeah, that is great. And it's a fun way to run with different people or people outside your pace group as well. I used to do a lot of run commuting into the office, and I would do it, the day after a workout and run with other people who are, just getting into training or just getting into running in general. And it's fun how like you can force yourself to slow down and still have it be an effective run for you.
I'm trying to figure things out. I just reconnected with Billy Barnett. He's the guy that's on the cover of Born to Run. And he moved to Hawaii about 15 years ago and has been living here ever since. And I asked him about his training because his racing is still unbelievable. He just finished 3rd overall in the Honolulu Marathon, age 36. But, he's a high school teacher and the father of a newborn baby and a full-time, surfs all the time. Like, dude, how do you finish 3rd? In a Honolulu in a major marathon? Like, what's your training? Your training must be crazy. He's like, oh no, man, it's almost all super low heart rate, super easy, pushing the jog stroller, but it's super consistent. He doesn't care what the pace is as long as he's putting in those happy miles. He's racking up good high miles weeks and never feeling sore, never feeling beat up. And then when the time comes, he can turn around and translate that into high performance.
I love that. Yeah, gratitude, consistency, joy. I think that's the secret sauce. Chris, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. We're gonna have to link up for a run. I'll give you a pass on not making it to Utah, but maybe you can make it one state over to Colorado at some point in the future.
Let's meet in Georgia for run around Atlanta in February, dude. I'll message you about it. Run all the way around the city of Atlanta, 30 miles.
That sounds cool. If people are interested in buying Born to Run 2, when is it out? Where can they find it?
Yeah, you can pre-order it now. You can jump on borntorun.world and pre-order it there. But just find me on social media, and I'll be happy to steer you the rest of the way.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and we'll see you out there.
Dude, so good connecting with you.
Likewise. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.